Like I said, today we're looking at Until Dawn. Most horror games are these survival horror type games, like Resident Evil or Dead Space, where the horror aspect comes from attempting to manage limited resources and from facing off against monsters in claustrophobic spaces. Or games like Outlast and Amnesia, heavy on atmosphere with an emphasis of making the player feel helpless against those trying to harm. Some horror games just rely on cheap jump scares, but not many horror games convey horror the same way that movies do. The most notorious video game depiction of a horror film is Friday the 13th for the NES. The game does a good job of portraying the hopelessness that the campers feel while being stalked by Jason, but that's because the game is an impossible piece of shit. But there is a game that conveys a good horror narrative, borrowing a lot of elements and cliches from classic and modern horror movies, and that game is Until Dawn. Until Dawn was released on the PS4 in 2015. It was developed by Supermassive Games, whose biggest previous works included development for some Little Big Planet DLCs, and it was published by Sony Computer Entertainment. The game was actually announced back in 2012 for the PS3, with Move support, but was pushed back until 2015. Oddly enough, the game actually uses a modified version of the engine from Killzone Shadowfall, and uses the Havoc physics engine. I'm giving a warning now, there will be spoilers in this video. I will try to avoid them when discussing the game's mechanics, but given the nature of such a narrative-driven game, it's hard not to talk about them, so you have been warned. It's also worth noting that this game has many different endings and branching narratives, so my review pertains to my playthrough of the game, the choices that I made, and the events that I experienced. The most polarizing thing about this game is the gameplay itself. Some people will really enjoy it and others will hate it, and that's because it's more of an interactive story than a real quote-unquote game. Similar to other modern point-and-click style games such as the Telltale games, Beyond Two Souls, and Heavy Rain, the game is spent walking around a room and interacting with things and people in the environment, with a heavy emphasis on decision-making and dialogue options. I feel like Until Dawn, even more than the similar games I mentioned, has an emphasis on that decision-making. Everything from dialogue, plot devices, character relationships, deaths, and minute details like leaving a certain item in the room for later are all influenced by players' decisions and have the ability to affect the story as the game progresses. All action sequences in the game are played out with QuickTime events, and some of these QTEs are much more forgiving than others, if you do fail one. You play the game as 8 friends, all representing a cliched horror stereotype. The cast is comprised of Nathan Drake, played by Brett Stulton, the popular kid, charismatic, and well-liked by everyone in the group. Sam, the adventurous, athletic, level-headed member of the group, played by Hayden Pantier. Chris, played by Noah Fleiss, is the sarcastic, practical joking nerd of the group. Ashley, played by Galadriel Steinman, is the shy, quiet, insecure girl of the group. Jessica, played by Megan Martin, is the outgoing, flirty girl of the group who isn't afraid to flaunt her body and sexuality around. Matt, played by Jordan Fisher, is the jock of the group. He is passionate and kind, but can be pushed around a bit, especially by Emily, who is played by Nicole Bloom. She is intelligent, yet demanding and controlling. Last, you can play as Josh, the conflicted member of the group. The game revolves around you playing as each member and adapts to the decisions you make with each one. What I really like about all the characters is that they feel fleshed out. In the beginning, they all act the role of their basic stereotype, but as the game progresses, you can see how the relationships change in dynamic ways. Love triangles forms and friendships are tested. Each character is more complex than initially let on. For example, Jessica is pretty much portrayed as the ditzy slut at the beginning of the game. But a couple chapters in, it is revealed that Jessica is actually really insecure about herself and that she has worries and that she uses her attractiveness to get things because it makes her feel better about her worries. It adds a level of depth to the character you might not have expected early on in the game.
I gotta be honest, I'm really kinda insecure.
Jess, you've got to be kidding me.
What?
You have nothing to be insecure about.
Oh, you have no idea.
Sure I do. You're just like me and everyone else. We're all insecure. But you know how to handle yourself. You might call it a front, but it's real.
Yeah, I guess I do.
Yeah, and that's super fucking hot.
Really?
Yeah, hell yeah it is.
See if you can find a blanket and maybe we can snuggle up a bit by the fire and sort out exactly how big of a dick you are.
Okay. Whoa.
There's also a heavy emphasis on the symbolism of the butterfly effect, even so much as to have certain characters discussing the idea at the beginning of the game. The idea is that one small, seemingly insignificant decision can have a lot of influence on changing fate. There's actually an in-game system called the butterfly effect, which influences how the story progresses based on your decisions. Each time you make a decision, butterflies will appear on the screen, signifying that you have influenced the story's fate. The overarching goal of the game is to keep everyone alive while you investigate a mystery. This means that there are hidden items that you can find and collect as you play. These items include clues that will aid in solving the overall mystery of the game, and totems, which give the player insight into future events. There are 5 different types of totems. Death, which shows a potential death. Danger, which shows a potential hazard. Loss, which shows a character the potential death of one of their friends. Guidance, which gives insight into a correct decision. And Fortune, which shows the good outcome of that decision. There are 3 main endings: a good ending where everyone survives, a bad ending where everyone dies, and a mixed ending where some of the kids survive and some die. There are numerous endings with the mixed ending, however, which change dialogue based on who survives at the end of your game. I only managed to save 2 people on my first playthrough. Because of the various endings and branching paths, the game has a lot of replay value, and it adds incentive to try and play in different ways. The graphics are also noteworthy. The game looks really good and has the best motion capture I've seen so far. The game's characters actually look like they're actors. The face animations are incredibly detailed and expressive. And while not really that scary, the game has plenty of atmosphere and creates a lot of tension, complemented by a wonderfully atmospheric soundtrack from Jason Graves, who you might recognize from working on the Dead Space and current Tomb Raider games. In addition to the gameplay and the story with the 8 kids, there are also segments of the game where the player must interact with a sort of psychiatrist. These parts break the game into episodes, complete with a recap. I actually lost my footage from the beginning of the game, so a lot of my early footage will come from these recap segments. The psychiatrist will ask questions pertaining to what you fear and breaks the fourth wall asking how you think the game is going. The purpose of these segments is to curtail the game to your responses and get you to think about your decisions as you play the game. Now let's get into the story. I'm going to try not to get into every little detail, but again, there will be spoilers coming up. And again, my review is based on my playthrough, so the events I will be talking about come from my experience. With all that being said, despite the control the player has over certain aspects of the story, main plot points will always occur the same no matter what decisions the player makes. If you want to skip the spoilers, and thus the story review, click on the button on the screen or in the description. The story begins as the 8 friends I mentioned above, and Josh's sisters, Hannah and Beth, both played by Ella Latini, all meet at Josh's family's vacation home on the Blackwood Mountains. You start the game playing as Beth, looking for her sister who has wandered off in the house to meet up with her crush Mike. Little does Hannah know that she is being set up by the rest of the crew, who take embarrassing video of her as she begins to strip for Mike. They all come out of hiding, surprising Hannah, who runs off crying into the woods. Beth runs after her. They both end up falling off the edge of the mountain and are never seen again. We then skip to the next year, and Josh is once again hosting another vacation getaway at the lodge. He hopes it will bring the group back together after the tragedy of losing Hannah and Beth. It is during the opening chapters, the group arriving at the lodge, that we are exposed to who everyone is, and their current relationship statuses with everyone else, their goals, their personalities. The game does a good job of putting you in the shoes of every character. The beginning of the game is where it feels most like you're playing a slasher film. A bunch of horny teenagers go into a secluded cabin for the weekend, intent on pulling pranks on one another and having sex without adult interruption. And if there is one thing slasher films have taught us, is that when a group of teens get together to have sex in secluded cabins, they're gonna die. And sure enough, before the kids can relax, a masked psycho appears, scaring, kidnapping, and attempting to kill the helpless teens. The slasher first appears when Mike and Jessica are off in a side house, alone. Jessica is captured, and Mike follows the captor through a mine shaft into an abandoned sanitarium. This sets up the other central locations the game follows, these being the house, the mine, and the sanitarium, and these are the places where all the action happens.
Oh, fucking sick. That's what I say.
Slasher actually isn't the only horror trope that Until Dawn borrows. Shortly after the psycho first appears and terrorizes Mike and Jessica, Ashley, Chris, and Josh hold a seance with an old Ouija board that they find. Ashley is able to connect with what seems like Hannah, and the game shifts to a kind of modern poltergeist, possession, ghost horror movie kind of thing, where noises are randomly heard and apparitions appear and things go flying around the room. It is an interesting shift in tone. And this isn't the only tone shift either. These shifts in tone are conveyed by the group splitting up. Mike sets off to go to the sanitarium and find Jessica. Ashley, Chris, and Josh stay in the house to try and figure out the mystery of the seance, and also experience run-ins with the psycho within the house. Emily and Matt leave the group to go and try and find a radio to call for help, where they are told by police that they will arrive at dawn to rescue them, and they have run-in with the psycho armed with a flamethrower. And Sam leaves the group to take a bath and then is eventually captured with the psycho and has to fight her way back. Eventually, it is revealed that Josh is actually the psycho, and that he was trying to scare everyone as payback for what happened to his sisters. This is when another main shift occurs, as the man with the flamethrower who is chasing Emily and Matt is not actually the psycho, but is another character, who appears to tell the group of Wendigos, who are actually the monsters that kidnapped Jessica, not Josh/the psycho. Yes, the story becomes a weird monster movie. Wendigos are humans who transform into monsters after consuming human flesh. One of the possible clues actually reveals the origin of the Wendigos in that area, as Hannah had survived at the beginning of the game by feasting on Beth, who died in the fall, and transformed into a Wendigo. The remainder of the game has the group trying to figure out what happened to Beth and Hannah, where the Wendigos came from, how to stop the Wendigos, and how to get out alive. At the very end, the group ends up blowing up the house, kills all the Wendigos. The police arrive at dawn, saving the remaining teens. Like I said, I only had 2 teens survive at the end of the game, Sam and Emily, so the game ends with the 2 of them explaining what happened to the police. Overall, I highly recommend the game. The graphics and atmosphere are great, and there's a lot of tension. The story is interesting and engaging. The characters are also interesting, and you become invested in them. There are a lot of replay value to see where all the branching paths in-game offers, and there's various endings and dialogue options. If you are into point-and-click style, interactive narrative games like the Telltale games, give this one a go. Also, there's a sequel that just recently came out. It's actually more of a spin-off, and it's available for the PS4 VR. It's an on-rails shooter inspired by the original Until Dawn, and it kind of seems to have a evil carnival theme to it. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you like this episode, please give us a like and subscribe. Leave us a comment with your thoughts and any recommendations for games you want to see. Until next time.